Hello, and welcome to Rough Edges Podcast with Sarah I. Fox. In this podcast, I will guide you through my faith and mental health journey to dispel the stigma surrounding mental illness and to create an empowering resource for those who wish to discover more about these topics. I pray that this podcast will not only bless you, but that it will bring growth and healing to our communities. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rough Edges. Today, I am joined by a very special guest. Her name is Amanda Blackwood. But before I get into introducing Amanda, I want to do a small trigger warning. We're going to be talking about human trafficking and the trauma that's associated with that. So, you've been warned. It's a pretty heavy subject, but we're going to have a good time. So, Amanda Blackwood is an accomplished artist and author, public speaker, podcast host, trauma recovery mentor, and a survivor of human trafficking. Amanda has spoken on a multitude of stages, international summits, radio programs, and has published over a dozen books. She launched 2 podcasts, one that focuses on interviewing other authors of trauma, and the other that discusses the long-term consequences of trauma and how to fight back for a better life. A portion of every book sale goes to help fight human trafficking. Amanda lives in Denver, Colorado, with her rescue cats and supportive husband who keep her sane. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm super excited to be with you today.
Yes, I'm excited to have you. So, Amanda, just to get to know you a little bit better, what are 3 things that you are most passionate about and why?
I am most passionate about, number one, getting the truth out there when it comes to human trafficking, because we have too many preconceived and skewed notions of what it looks like. Number 2, I am passionate about my religion. I am very much a Christian at heart. I love my Lord, and I think that he is just incredible. And number 3, I'm passionate about the commitment that I have made to my husband. These are all very, very important things to me. These are, this is 90% of my entire life, these 3 things.
I love that. And I also resonate with being a woman of faith. And I do agree that God is just awesome and he's doing a lot of awesome things, especially through wonderful people like you who are doing the good work and like you said, revealing the truth about human trafficking. But because there are so many preconceived notions that we have about it, and a lot of it is not necessarily accurate. And so I thank you for going into that work and especially giving your story and your history, knowing all of that and bringing that truth to light as well. And also, I just love how you said it was a commitment to your husband, because I appreciate that aspect of marriage and also the relationship in general. And I love even in your bio, you're yeah, they keep me sane. So I really appreciate that.
With the kind of life I've lived, if I didn't have my husband and my cats in my life, oh my gosh, you'd be picking me up off of pieces all over the floor pretty much every day. They really do keep me together. It's amazing what it can do to have functional love in your life.
Yeah, no, I agree. Most definitely. It's needed. It very much is.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And I want to kind of just go a little bit more in depth into your story. So can you tell me about your experience with human trafficking and what were some of the ways that you learned how to manage the trauma that came from that?
So the first thing that I want to make sure that we address, of course, is what human trafficking actually is. Because when I start getting into my story, people are going to notice that there's certain aspects that are missing. And if they believe that those parts have to exist to be part of human trafficking, then they're not going to understand what it is that I'm telling them. So human trafficking, I would say the best idea is not to Google it, because Google is not a reputable source on all things, but rather to look at a reputable source like the Department of Homeland Security. Now,
Mm.
the Department of Homeland Security defines human trafficking as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain labor or sex acts from another person. So if you notice, there's no mention of transportation, there's no mention of money, there's no mention of age, there's no restrictions anywhere among any of that information. It's very
Mm.
basic.
Mhm.
So my story kind of begins not with the trafficking part, but with the abuse. As with most survivors of human trafficking, most victims of human trafficking, we experience massive amounts of abuse in our early childhood, and it kind of leaves us more vulnerable to that world. So the first time I remember ever being molested, I was only 4.
Mm.
It was by my brother, and we kept it a secret for a very, very long time. In fact, as the years went on, I completely forgot about it because of other traumas that were happening. And I actually didn't remember that moment until I was 26 years old and sitting on a friend's couch. And that was just an absolutely terrible moment of remembering this. But the other traumas that were going on, my father was physically abusive, my mother was mentally abusive, and I had this every single day growing up. When I was 12, I was molested again at 13, 15, 16. I was raped at 17 by somebody I thought was my best friend.
Mm.
So I grew up believing that I was a sex object. Starting at 4 years old, this is what I am. This is how people are going to treat me. And if I don't give this to them, they're going to take it from me. So I might as well use it to my own advantage.
Mm.
So when I was 18 years old, I found myself living with a man who was more than twice my age because I needed a place to live and because he was nice to me. He offered me what it was that I was pretty convinced I needed in my life, which at that point was kindness. I needed a roof over my head. He offered me these things. This is what abusers typically do. So you can draw a lot of parallels between domestic violence and human trafficking. But he was the first person to ever traffic me. He basically
Mm.
loaned me out to his buddy for a birthday weekend in Las Vegas. The way it was presented to me, it was going to be an all expenses paid trip to Las Vegas. I was going to go there and have fun. I was only 18, so I knew I couldn't gamble. I wasn't interested in gambling. I wanted to ride the roller coaster at the top of New York, New York. I'd already done it once. I thought it was amazing. I love that roller coaster. I couldn't wait to go back. But when we got there, instead, I was locked up in a small hotel room for 52 hours. I was told that I wasn't allowed to leave. I didn't have a room key to be able to get back in. And if I left, I would be forfeiting my travel expenses to get back to where it was that I was living. I would not have any transportation. I wouldn't have any identification. I would have nothing, no money, nothing. So I had to stay in that hotel room and put up with what was being done to me, which was a cycle of abuse. He would go and gamble for a little while, and then he would come back up and rape me or molest me, and then pass out and go to sleep for a few hours, and then do this again and again. I was allowed to get room service once a day, but the room service people and the front desk people had been paid off to make sure that they didn't ask any questions.
Wow.
And if they brought the room service, they were to drop it off outside of the hotel room and walk away before I was allowed to retrieve it. This is how human trafficking is often not portrayed when it comes to it existing in hotels. When you hear about it in hotels, you think it's only underage children. You think it's kids that are being brought in through a tunnel system. And you think of people that are not necessarily coming in and doing this repeatedly, but people that are having constant contact or they're just in and out. It's a repeated thing. It's one person's hotel room again and again and again and again. It's a strange world to be in. I knew that what I was going through was very abusive, but I didn't know that it was called human trafficking because this was 1998. This wasn't something that people were really talking about yet. I was trafficked twice more in my life. So when I got back from this event, I took off as fast as I could and got out of there. And I ended up, after about a year or so, landing down in Florida. My plan was that I had injured myself at work one day, and I was going to go and stay with my dad's mother while I waited to get my knee surgery done. So I went all the way there. I was at the Daytona Beach bus station when I called my grandmother. It was about 10:30 at night. And I was going to let them know that they could come and pick me up because I didn't have their address. I didn't know how to get to their home. And it was her husband, my dad's stepfather, who actually answered the phone. And what I got instead was, we're not coming to get you. You're on your own. Good luck.
Mm.
I didn't know for many years that this was because my parents had called them and told them, she's running from her problems again. And if you take her in, we'll never speak to you again.
Wow.
So as any 19-year-old kid would do, I sat down on the curb and was crying my eyes out. And a young couple came up and found me. And this young couple, they listened to my story as best they could between the sobs. And they told me, we've got a place. You can come and stay with us until you get on your feet. And I believed them. But what they actually meant was, we've got a place. We'll give you a place to stay until we can find the highest bidder. Because they sold me to a man named Esteban, and I was locked up for 23 and a half hours in a small room with no food, no water, and no bathroom facilities. This was more or less a kidnapping scenario. It was modern day slavery. I was sold as easily as if I was a bag of potato chips from a 7-Eleven. When I managed to get out of there, thankfully, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I was obsessed with this TV show back then called MacGyver. And the guy could fix anything with a paperclip and a rubber band.
Yes.
And I thought to myself, what would MacGyver do? And for many years, I had a t-shirt that literally said, what would MacGyver do across the front of it? I wore the thing out until it fell apart into rags. But I managed to MacGyver my way out of that room.
Wow.
And when I ran, I didn't stop running. I ended up out in California because it was as far from Florida as I could possibly get. And when I was in LA, my ambition was to find some kind of a solid career. At first, it was kind of rocky, and I was doing odd jobs and stuff, just trying to stay afloat. And I ended up acting. I was on Alias and Will and Grace. I modeled for Harley Davidson. I did a lot of really cool things. And eventually, I landed a job as a mall cop. And it didn't pay great, but it had potential. Within 5 months, I had busted open a massive embezzlement ring. And I had taken over the job. I was then suddenly launched into being the director of public safety and security for 6 properties in LA County. I had a solid career ahead of me. I had an $11,000 a year raise. I got raises for all of my employees. And I was really making something of myself. But during this period when I was in LA, internet dating had become a thing. And in 2004, I had met a man that I really appreciated and liked. And he really appreciated and liked me. So we would have Skype conversations. This was back when Skype was all the rage instead of Zoom. And he would be eating breakfast as I would be eating dinner. And we would talk over a meal and have a great time. We'd talk about what our day looked like, or what our day had looked like. We felt like we were in a real friendship. And so for 7 years, we lived like this. Eventually, he came over to visit me. I went over to go and visit him. And after 7 long years, we had decided that we were in love, and I was going to move to go and be with him. And this was definitely long distance. I mean, the man lived in Scotland. So I had to get a fiance visa to be able to move to Scotland.
Yeah.
And I had to give up my career and my car and my home, all of that stuff. Had to give everything up to go be with him. But I had been so lonely for so long. And this man knew all of the bad stuff that had happened in my life. I told him everything. I knew I could trust him. And I got all the way there, and I landed in January of 2011. And it took him 7 years to get me there, and it took him 7 days to start trafficking me. I thought I was going off to land of kings and castles and, fairy tales and dreams come true and all that kind of stuff. Everything that we ever saw in those Disney movies growing up. Yeah, that's what I was looking forward to. That's not what I got. Within that first week was beautiful. I got to do whatever I wanted and go wherever I wanted as long as he approved. But after that first week, when he started having me entertain his guests that were coming over, I immediately wanted to get out of there. I didn't know how to get out of there. I didn't know how to fight back against it. I knew that I needed to make some changes, but I didn't know what to do. But he did drink a lot, and I used that to my advantage. So one night when he had some guests come over and I was expected to entertain, I was pouring his whiskey glass full every time it started getting about halfway down. Kind of like a really good waitress in a Denny's. They make sure that you can't ever see the bottom of your cup. I was doing that with whiskey that night. By the end of the evening, he was so drunk that he didn't recognize it when I was conning him into giving me back my passport, my debit card, my driver's license, all of that stuff. And I told him that the reason I needed it was so I could go down to the bank and pull out the money that I had and give it to him so we could spend it. In reality, I jumped on a computer and tried to purchase the first flight out that I could afford. I only had a little bit over $2,000 in my bank at the time. And the first flight out was over $12,000.
Oh.
So I couldn't take that first flight out, of course. The second day was too much. The third day was too much. The first ticket out that I could afford was on the fifth day. And it would leave me with a total of $11 to my name. But it was worth every penny.
Yeah.
And I told myself, we have this thing that we do when we're going through trauma. We tell ourselves, I've been through worse. I'll get through this too. This is really a dangerous mindset if you put it in terms of somebody who is going through domestic violence. I've been through worse already. I'll get through this too. But you never know what this event is going to be. And I found myself being so abused that I ended up with a kidney infection so severe I was in the hospital when that flight took off, and it was a non-refundable ticket.
Wow.
So I lost it, and I still only had $11 to my name. I had nothing left. He had found out about the ticket, and of course I paid for that. That's when I found out what sport torture was. I was waterboarded. I had sleep deprivation. I had food deprivation. I had some pretty horrible things done. And a lot of it was just for sport, just specifically not to get answers or to try to break me, but rather for their own entertainment. Eventually, I tried to commit suicide, and I failed at that. And if you're going to fail at something, at least let it be something like that, right? I've been pretty successful in everything else I've done since then. Let that be the one thing I fail at. And I was at a train station. I had determined I was going to commit suicide by train when a man walked out onto the platform, and I had been praying repeatedly all day long, please, Lord, send somebody to find me. Send somebody to see me. And this man saw me. I was, at the time, I was still a smoker. He saw me lighting up my cigarette, and he asked me for a light. So I handed him my little book of matches, and I told him he could keep them. I wouldn't need them anymore. And the only reason I said that was because I wanted him to ask me why. And he didn't ask. And I knew that I couldn't make this total stranger care about my story. And so I gave up again. And then a little guy, little tiny, he's probably 4 years old, walked out on the platform, and he took this man's hand. And this was his kid. And this child looked at me. And rather than looking at me like everybody else had been, this little boy saw me. I could see it in his eyes. The pain registered with him. He could see that there was something broken inside of me. And it scared me because he knew me and I didn't even know me anymore. And it took me about 20 seconds to realize that I was actually running back toward my prison instead of toward the train. And I was thanking God as I was going, because I knew that in that dark moment, if he was going to keep me alive, my life was going to mean something more than that. Eventually, I started leaving kind of like a mental breadcrumb trail, making this guy believe that I would do anything for him, that trauma bonding, what we used to call Stockholm Syndrome, had taken such a deep root in me that I would do literally anything to please him. And eventually, I sat him down in June of 2011. I had been there for 152 days.
Wow.
And I told him the day that we had picked to get married, according to the fiancé visa, had come and gone a couple of months previous. And if I overstayed my 6-month visa without us actually getting married, I could get in trouble and be kicked out of the country and never be allowed back according to UK law. And he could lose his job since he was a police officer. But if he sent me back to LA for 6 months, I could return in time for Christmas and it would be our first Christmas together. And wouldn't it be beautiful? Within 2 hours, I had a round trip ticket that he purchased. And he put money in my bank so that I could survive for the first month while I was looking for a job.
Wow.
But it didn't end just because I left there. He hunted me. Every time he found out that I got a new job, he would take all these photos and videos that he had been recording when he was having me entertain his guests, basically rape videos. And he would put them in an email, and he would email them to my boss. He would email them to my friends. I lost friends. I lost jobs. I lost dignity. I lost so much trying to figure out how to deal with this. I went into hiding. I had super short hair at the time. I tried to grow my hair out so I could change my appearance. I tried to dye my hair a different color. I did everything that I could think of trying to go into hiding. And no matter what I did, he kept finding me. And finally, I said, I just can't stay here in California anymore because he's going to continue to somehow find me out here. I didn't know if he had connections to the police out there or not. So in 2016, I loaded up an SUV with my 4 cats that I had collected over those years. And I drove to Colorado. And I got out here and I tried to start my life all over again. And in 2019, he attacked me one more time. I found out that he had taken all of these old photos and videos and he had put them all on a pornography website and made me famous overnight. I was recognized in a grocery store, not for being on Will and Grace or Alias or for modeling for Harley Davidson or any of the really cool stuff that I had done while I was in LA. I was recognized for being raped and asked for my autograph. It destroyed me. I reached out immediately to a couple of anti-trafficking organizations. The first one paired me up with legal services that are pro bono legal services for survivors of trafficking. They started reaching out to the pornography, different websites and having the stuff pulled off. Every single time one went down, another went up. In some cases, one went down and 2 went up. We couldn't keep up. We could not cut this off at the pass. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to live through it. I didn't know that I even wanted to live through it. My entire life at that point, starting when I was 4, as far back as I could remember, was this incredibly abusive thing, this existence. I was 39 years old and I was still facing all of this pain. I didn't know how to deal with it. So the other organization that I reached out to paired me up with a therapist. And the first therapist I saw, I swear to you, I traumatized this woman so much that she has left the industry. She will never practice again.
Oh my God.
But the second therapist they paired me up with, I went into the conversation with her completely aware that she had already worked with other survivors of trafficking. So she at least knew stuff, you know? Yeah. And I went in with 2 very important criteria for her to work with me. And I said, number 1, do not come at me with prescription medications right off the bat. I don't want a Band-Aid. I want a shovel. And number 2, don't walk on eggshells. Don't pull the punches. Don't treat me like I am some porcelain doll that's going to easily break, because if I was going to break, I would have done it already. Now let's get busy. A year and a half went by. And in that year and a half, I learned so much about the way my brain works and so much about trauma reactions and what they do and what the long-term consequences are and why my brain was repeating these patterns. In a year and a half, I finally sat down and said, I think I'm ready to write my autobiography. And she says, well, this is great because I'm not sure that there's much more that I can do to help you. And this was November of 2020. And she said, Christmas is right around the corner. How about I check in with you in January? I said, hey, that sounds great. She checked in with me in January and she said, so how's it going? I said, I'm doing great. How are you? And she said, no, that's not what I mean. How's it going? How's the book going? She said, have you started it yet? I said, Amy, I finished it.
Oh,
is this a short book or something? I said, no. She says, aren't you still working 2 full-time jobs? I said, yeah. But when you get inspired, you can't turn it off.
Yeah.
I wrote a 350-page book in the month of December during the Christmas season while working 2 full-time jobs.
Wow.
She said, well, now what are you going to do? I said, I'm not sure. I don't know. She said, I want you to try painting. I said, Amy, anytime I've ever painted, it's always come out looking like a multicolored snowman laying on his side. I don't know how to paint. She said, I'm going to send somebody over with brushes and canvases and acrylic paints. I want you to just try. Like, all right, just don't expect too much. Within 3 months, I sold my first piece back to the anti-trafficking or organization that paired me up with her in the first place. They made prints of it and sold the prints to be able to help fund the counseling services for other survivors of trafficking.
Wow.
Within 5 months, I was an international artist. Some of my work was sold to a home for human trafficking survivors in Chicago. I have a print of it that hangs behind me in my office. It's called Carry Your Own Baggage. And it's all about how we all have to carry our own baggage through life before we find a safe place to set it down.
Mm.
And it hangs with that essay so that everybody who walks through their doors is reminded that they're not alone, and we're better to lay their baggage than at the feet of the people who want to help.
Mm.
So the
Wow.
Chicago Tribune wrote an article about me. That painting was unveiled the same week, I believe, that my autobiography was published. And then a month later is when I met my husband.
I love that. Oh my gosh. I am just like, well, first off, thank you so much for just being vulnerable and opening up and sharing your story on this particular platform and with me, a person that we knew each other through email, but we never really knew each other. Thank you so much for sharing your story and also sharing the hope that comes with that. And I know it must have been a whole lot to deal with. And I commend you for just having that tenacity and also just knowing what your limits were and knowing exactly what you wanted, especially in your healing journey. And the fact that you were able to just like tell your therapist, like, listen, this is what I need, and this is where I'm at right now, and this is what I need help with. And I really admire that because a lot of the times it's like having these traumatic experiences could kind of just put us in a dark place. And it could be very difficult to get out of that pit once you're in it. And I am just so honored to be able to hear stories like yours because it not only shows me that you are able to make it through those experiences, but also it shows that your story is not over. Like those traumatic experiences that happen to you, it's not the end of your story. It's not the sum of your story. That was not the whole story. Like you went on to be like an international artist. You were like making change. Like it was incredible how everything unfolded after all of that. And you're still out here sharing your story, out here making a difference. And I am just so like blessed to hear like how God has moved in your life as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. I definitely still have my rough edges, which is why we're talking, right? Uh,
Yes. For
and
sure.
recovering from trauma is absolutely possible for
Yes.
anybody. It takes a lot of hard work, and the work is absolutely worth it, but that doesn't mean that it goes away forever. It's not like waving a magic wand.
Yeah.
I still do have those little moments where I have to deal with some PTSD, and it can be a little scary, but this is where my emotional support animal comes in. We were talking before we started recording. I had a cat earlier fall asleep upside down in my lap with his little bunny paws up near his chin. Cutest little guy. Oh my gosh. But he wakes me up from PTSD nightmares by headbutting me under the chin. He is
Wow.
self-taught to do this. Animals can tune into us. It's important to have companionship of some sort. If you feel like you're not ready for a romantic relationship, These little guys are what got me through it until I was.
Mm. Yeah. No, I agree. As like a fellow cat mom, I just love, like, shout out to Felix, my little baby boy. He is just like such a joy, and he also keeps me on top of, like, the routine that I have, because he would wake me up in the morning if he sees that I'm laying down a little too long, or he would just like, just come over if he sees, like, I'm crying and stuff, like he would just come over and rub like against my legs and everything, and like, trying to comfort me in his own little way. But yeah, I definitely agree that, you need like community, like at large as well. Cause it's like, you can't get through these things by yourself. I mean, you could try, but it's more helpful to have like a community and a support system around you as well. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, these things are pivotal. This is what helps people to really recover. That and knowledge. Knowledge is key when it comes to any kind of recovery. You have to understand yourself. You have to understand what you're going through if you're going to understand how to fight back against it.
Mm-hmm.
I started working on learning a lot more about trauma and the stages of trauma and the trauma signs and all that stuff a few years ago. And that's actually what led me to write the Growth from Darkness workbook series. So the first book in the series is all about the stages of trauma. It starts with, of course, the denial. It goes all the way through bargaining, anger, depression, and acceptance. And they mirror the stages of grief. And that's because we have to grieve for the person that we were. We have to grieve for what we've lost. We have to grieve for everything that we've been through. It is an absolute grieving process. The
Yeah.
second book in the series, once people are ready to start moving into that acceptance and understanding it, is all about the trauma reactions, what the long-term consequences are of not dealing with them, and then how to fight back against them and retraining our brains.
Mm-hmm.
So next year, I'm going to be coming out with the next two books in the series, which is about healthy boundaries and how to support a survivor. These are all things that people who've been through trauma need to understand, because if we don't understand how our brains work, we can't break that bad cycle that we have. Those trauma reactions are really handy in the moment. They're not so handy afterward. We start punishing the people in our lives for things that they haven't even done to us.
Right, right. No, that's very true. And I also wanted to kind of like dive into like how your faith played a role in like how you were able to like manage and like, still managing like, trauma responses like post, your human trafficking experience. So can you kind of tell me like how has like your faith played a role in your healing?
Well, faith has always been really important to me. Yeah, I grew up in this household where we said prayer over dinner, but only when it was dinner at home, never out in restaurants. And we didn't go to church. And I wanted to understand who was this person that we were talking to that I couldn't see. I didn't understand. I wanted to understand. So I started asking questions at a really young age. I'm the kid that figured out the truth about Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny when I was about 4. I wanted to know. Tell me this truth. Tell me who these people are. So when I was about 9, I started running away from home on Sundays trying to go to church. Other kids at 9 years old, they're running away from home so they don't have to get dragged to church. I was putting on my best clothes and grabbing my bike and riding 1.5 miles to get to the nearest church. And my parents got mad at me for it. They didn't get mad because of anything other than I was going to a non-denominational Christian church. And they said, we're Methodist. You don't go to one of those churches. We don't want you getting the wrong message.
Wow.
So I begged them, just take me to your church then, because I want to learn. And they refused for many, many years. When they finally did take me to a Methodist church, I was 15 years old and I had already begun running away from home. I was already pretty far gone in the realm of not wanting to be a part of their family. I tried churches again here and there, and things just didn't ever really fit. You have to find the right church. It's kind of like the same thing as finding the right therapist. 90% of people lie to their therapist. Why are you going to lie to somebody you're paying to help you? It's the same thing with a church. You go into a church, 90% or 92, I think, percent of people who go into a church pretend like they're perfectly fine when they're not.
Mm.
You go there not because you have to put up a pretense of being perfect, but you go there because it's okay to be broken.
Yeah.
And when I moved out to Colorado, I had a very dear friend who was the audio engineer for a small church that wasn't too far from my house. It was only like 16 miles or so. And I would drive to that church on Sunday mornings after working a graveyard shift so that I could go to church.
Wow.
And he started teaching me the audio console, and I started learning more and paying attention more. And the pastor started talking to me because I was there early enough. He would confide in me and ask me about what I thought about certain services. And it made me feel like I was a part of the family. And I learned this deep truth about how important it is to not just go to the services, but to become an actual part of the church. You're not a part of the church if you're just showing up for services and feel like you're doing your part and leaving.
Yeah.
You got to be a part of the community. I've
Yes.
had some recent health issues now to where I've not been able to attend quite regularly, but my husband is one of the part-time audio engineers for our church.
Mhm.
And I miss it when I'm not able to go. I feel this constant reaching, not just me reaching out to the church, but God reaching out to me.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
been a huge part. And that little boy that saved my life that day on that platform, he wasn't looking at me with the eyes of a child. He was looking at me with the eyes of an all-seeing God.
Mm. Wow. Yeah. Oof. Got me tearing up over here, but yes, I agree with everything like you just said, especially about just like the way that God shows up in our trauma, because it's like even with your experience with the little boy, like, as you said, he was looking at you with the eyes of God. It's like God is near in those times. And it's like it could feel like he's distant because the pain is just so intense that it's just like, oh, I don't think I could feel God. Like, where is he? Like, why is he allowing this to happen? But he is right there. Like, he's near to the brokenhearted, and he is with you in those moments. And yes, it could be like, well, if he's with me, why am I still going through this? But hey, I will say that God's presence is just like the best reassurance that you will make it through and that you will survive. And I'm speaking from like personal experience as well. Like there were so many times where even dealing with like bipolar disorder where I felt like, God, why do I even have this? Like why would you allow me to have this thing that makes my life like a little bit harder, But like day by day I kind of, just keep on being persistent in like prayer and like, plugging in, like you said, to that community. And it just makes me realize like how much like God is just like wanting to just reach out and let us know like, hey, I'm here and you could come to me to find that comfort and rest. And yeah, I'm so happy that you shared that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny. I get asked that a lot of times. If you believe in God, why do you think he would allow things like this to happen? We're the ones who broke the rules.
Yeah, that's true.
We're the ones that got kicked out of Eden. We're the ones who chose to have free will over having heaven on earth.
Mm.
We can't have it both ways. We can't say, why do evil things happen on earth? And then also be grateful for our free will and for being able to do what it is that we want to do rather than living perfect lives.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, honestly, like you said it, because it's just like we often are the cause of a lot of the things that are hurting not only ourselves but like other people. And again, I'm not over here like blaming people for different things that happen, but at the same time it's like you said, it's like if we were just able to like, at least like try to tap in and try to at least go in with like an open heart and an open mind too, like just like allowing God to just take that pain and use it for a greater purpose. Like I think a lot of things would change like, significantly.
Absolutely. I mean, my life certainly has. God was telling me over and over and over and over again to write that book. And I kept on telling him, no, I've got this other one I'm going to work on first. No, I've got this series over here. Write your book. I'm not ready yet. I'm not going to do it yet. Write your book. I need to do this other thing. Write your book. I'm too busy. I got 2 full-time jobs. And when I finally sat down to write the book and it came out so fast, I finally realized why he was telling me to write the book.
Mm.
You know, I needed him to prompt me. I needed him to push me and to tell me to do this, because as much as I didn't want to do it, that was a huge part of my healing. I got it down on paper. I was able to physically set it down and walk away from it. And I mean, it was so much more than just symbolic, but God knew this the whole time. I was the idiot who wouldn't listen.
Oh my gosh. Not the idiot. No.
I was ignorant for sure.
Yeah, honestly, you were going through a lot at the time. Like, I don't blame you fully for that.
It was a rough year and a half. It really was.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. But I also do want to kind of delve in a little bit to like your book. But specifically because you wrote like a plethora of books, but specifically custom justice. Like you kind of like, spoke about like how you came to like, develop that and everything. But like how was the process in like creating the book, and also like where did that title come from?
The title is my favorite part. So, prosecuting somebody for human trafficking or domestic violence even is practically impossible across state borders. Imagine how difficult it would be then across international borders. You might get lucky to, let's say somebody in California did something drastic and terrible to me while I'm here in Colorado. If I were to find a lawyer here in Colorado who could defend me in court or who could prosecute for me in court, that lawyer here in Colorado would have to then pass the state bar exam also in California to be able to practice law in California to go through the California legal system. So if you take that and you put that into terms and context of being across international borders, you're never going to get legal justice. There are so very few human traffickers who ever face the consequences for their actions. Very, very few. And I knew in 2019 that when he was putting all of my social media and personal contact information on these pornography websites with these videos, so that people could find me and follow me, I knew that if people were going to keep finding me, they needed to understand why. And that's when I kind of started learning how to speak up. And at first I was really quiet. But eventually I learned that there was a lion in my lungs and it was just dying to get out. And when I wrote the book, I realized that even though I would never have legal justice, I would have very customized a version of my own justice. And that's where the title of Custom Justice came from. And basically, when I sat down to write the book, it was in the middle of a PTSD flashback. And it went away so quickly because I started to write down what I was thinking and seeing. It just went away. And I realized how potent this would be. So I just made a commitment that I was going to write at least a little bit, or try to write at least a little bit every day. It got me through some really rough stuff. It was while I was writing that book that I discovered that my first ex-husband had passed away tragically in a head-on car collision. I don't know that I would have handled that as well as I did if I hadn't been writing every single day at the time. And all of that went into the book.
Wow. That honestly, that is like really incredible. And the fact that you were able to just like get it all out and just like have it in physical form, because a lot of the times it's like that's why I love journaling so much, because you're able to get your thoughts out from in your head, which seems like so huge and overwhelming. And then when you put it on the page and you see the physical manifestation of everything that's been going on in your head, it's just like, wow, like I've been through a lot, but look at the ways that I was able to move through and heal through that. And that is just amazing that you were able to do that.
It's really super helpful. So, I mean, the book itself has one half of my face on the cover. It's a heavily edited, shall we say, image of me. This photo was taken when I was 41 years old. I was not that wrinkle-free as I am on that book cover, I promise you. The reason that it's such a heavily edited photo is because this is what we show the world. Yeah, when I was in therapy, one of the things that we did was create a mask, and it had to be half what we show the world and half what we hide from the world. And the part that I showed to the world was the same side of my face that I put on the book. I put up that perfect image. I put up the wrinkle-free, the blemish-free, the perfect hair day, the beautiful jewelry, the beautiful clothing, because that's the face that I always presented to the world before. The person that I really am is what's on the inside.
Wow. Honestly, that is like beyond poetic, and I love
it. Thank you. I was really proud of that. I designed the book cover completely myself.
Wow.
The photographer is a well-known wedding photographer out here in Colorado. He volunteered his services just because he wanted to have his name attached to the book in some way, because he knew it was going to be something important and he believed in it. And when we went out to do the photo, he asked me, now, what are you looking for? I already had a perfect mock-up image. This is what I want. We're going to recreate this, and we're going to do this with your style. So, okay, well, glad we know what we're doing. And we got the perfect image right away. It was great.
Wow. That's awesome. I love that. I really do love that. Amanda, it was so amazing to have you on the podcast. And before we just close, I have one last question for you. So, what advice or words of encouragement do you have for those who are dealing with trauma from experiencing like human trafficking?
Oh, my words of advice would go out to basically anybody who's experienced or is experiencing trauma of any kind. We have all grown up hearing the phrase, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and that is a lie. The man who coined the aphorism, his name was Friedrich Nietzsche. Not long after he came up with that phrase, he died in an insane asylum. I think we can let go of that one now. The truth isn't that the abuse or the abusers or the hard times are what make us stronger. The truth is that we've always had that strength within us. God gave us that strength. We've had it inside us, and those people don't deserve the credit for making us stronger. He does. And him alone.
Yes. Ooh, I love that. Thank you so much, Amanda. And where can people find you to learn more?
Head to growthfromdarkness.com or detailedpieces.com. I have two different websites. Think of me as vain. I don't know. One is more like the business aspect of stuff, and the other one's more like the personal world. People can reach me there. I'm very active on Facebook or Instagram also.
Yes, and I will link all of those in the episode description. And it was so wonderful having you, and everyone, stay tuned for more empowering episodes on Rough Edges. Thank you for listening to another episode of Rough Edges Podcast with Sarah I. Fox. If you want more exciting updates on the podcast, follow on Instagram at rough.edges.podcast. You can also visit the official podcast website at www.roughedgespodcast.com. Thanks again for listening, and have a wonderful day.